finding the wrong editor can be a startling experience. But when you find the right one, it's you can really make some music. And you know when you do, by the way. That's a pretty cool feeling. There's usually a comment or something early on where you can tell that they kind of get what you're going for. But you might not find that person immediately.
So we've already kind of hit on it a little bit with some of this revision. I want to dive into a little bit of that. There's that famous quote that anybody can write, but writers know how to rewrite. Marty, I guess maybe your ego said that you don't really need to have to rewrite because you're almost 90% there.
No,
you're almost there.
No, 90% there doesn't mean that you're not rewriting and getting the shit edited out of you.
Absolutely, and that's what I wanted to go on. Is within my own journey, I've realized writing is just very little of it. It is living in the moment and pulling these stories out of every experience that I have, and then going back on the writing that I thought was good and being like, this could be so much better. And going at it.
90% there means 90% to your first draft.
Right, exactly.
Like 90% to, like, I feel like I'm 90% there. I'm 90% happy with this. You're just now getting to, like, once you turn that draft in to whoever's editing you, then it's like, okay, now they're going to toss my shit and, make me feel bad about myself and all this other stuff. And, and that's why and that's why writers miss deadlines, because they dread that moment. They dread being like, okay, you're going to take my baby and make it Frankenstein. And it sucks,
I'm curious with David, how many drafts do you typically, because you've published in multiple genres, right? Mm-hmm. So when to your point, like, okay, I feel 90% of the way good about this first draft, right? On average, how many drafts have you experienced for a book before it is actually printed, right? How many drafts do you think that it goes through? How many edits and iterations of the back and forth?
I tend to edit as I go. I have a tendency to get, like, if I get three or four paragraphs in, then I'll go back and I'll look at it, And this is very chaotic. Like that doesn't mean I do it every time. It might depend on just the mood I'm in. But I definitely do not go from in just one day A to Z, and then say, okay, that's the first draft. I tend to usually go back and pick at it quite a bit. But if you don't consider that a revision, just a part of the writing process, I would say I probably do 4.
4?
Yeah. That's probably the average.
Which seems about right?
Yeah.
Like any more than that, you're probably being too hard. Like, it's probably too much.
Yeah, and
you're probably getting too far away from where you.
Some of my favorite authors, they've had like parallel quotes about a story's never done. You just have to find the time to say it's done, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just butchered it completely, but the point is taken. So there is a point where I'm just like, okay, get away from me.
Yeah.
Going back to the Frankenstein being your baby, have you found that issue within traditional publication where, like, you're like, this is mine, and, like, this is kind of what I want it to be?
Man, I have had some pretty ferocious discussions
well, that's what
with
I want
editors.
to happen right now.
What are their names, Martin?
Editors, but yeah.
What
are they saying?
No,
where do they live,
I think it is sometimes a problem where you get somebody who's, you have an editor who, it is possible for an editor to not be the right editor for what you're doing, or and there's also bad editors, who try to inject themselves. and then there are really great editors that you just don't appreciate for how great that they are at that time. And I think that's the situation I ran into. I think the first time I had a really rigorous features editor take a look at my stuff, I opened up that Google Doc and it was just strike through
red.
And I was like, what did you do to this? Like, it was fine. Like, I thought we'd just have a little bit of maybe rearranging to do, or like the lead could be tweaked or something.
Add some commas.
Yeah, like, and it was like, no, man, it was like, oh, like, good God, so I think that's where I think when you get your shit tossed like that, I think that's where you get the most growth as a writer, is because you're forced to see, like, and I'll tell you some of the stuff that I had the most rearranging done on, and to where they weren't telling me like you have to write it this way, but they were like asking questions about like why this, why does this even deserve to be in your story, or just like those prodding questions where you're like, well, I mean, and then you have to ask yourself, is this just navel gazing? Is this just me fucking ejaculating all over the page because it feels good, or does it actually? What they're bringing up, does it actually serve the story? Is it going to make a better experience for the reader, either inform or entertain them? If it's not doing those things, then what's it doing in there? Or something, there's some, I mean, even just simple things sometimes of like, oh, weird, for like an entire chapter, I decided to go passive voice instead of active. Like, what was I fucking thinking? How did I just like not pay attention that day? Or, just sometimes it's not even like, super advanced fucking like, oh man, just my story structure approach was off. It's like, sometimes it's just like, foundational level, like, hey, you got to be, no matter what stage of writing you're at, you still have to be good at the basics and be good at them every day that you sit down at the keyboard. Otherwise, your shit's going to get tossed and you're going to feel really bad about yourself.
And this talk is reminding me of talks I've had with other people, is that like the relationship in the writing sphere is not, just the writer and the publisher, maybe a writer and an agent if you go that route, but also the writer and the editor. You have to have the right thing. I think there is this belief that like editors are just editors. No, they're not. They're genre specific. Some of them align with what you're trying to say, others don't. And finding the wrong editor can be a startling experience. But when you find the right one, it's you can really make some music. But and you know when you do, by the way, that's a pretty cool feeling. Is there's usually a comment or something early on where you can tell that they kind of get what you're going for. But you might not find that person immediately.
we were talking about it earlier about, and he kind of brought it up, is that stages of writers where you kind of go into this with this ego, like, I'm going to redefine the craft, and I'm going to maybe not read and do my research, and I'm going to create this totally new voice. And then you have that experience where you get your shit kicked in, you're like, man, I'm really not that good. And then you persevere and
that's Luke seeing his aunt and uncle dead.
Yeah.
That's the beginning. That's the beginning right there.
Did you have a similar experience too?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like if you don't, you better have. It depends on how you do it nowadays, because there's so many avenues. But traditionally, it's sort of a rite of passage to have a slew of rejection notices. But your rejection notes, Stephen King talked about this quite a bit, is that as he got better, his rejection notices came with editorials like, hey, do this, do that, you know what I mean, instead of just the template, right? That's going to happen. That is definitely.
Rejection is a part of this job. If you're doing this for a living, you're going to get rejected, and it's going to because it's something that you poured yourself into. It should hurt. That should have been some type of emotion that you put out there, and that rejection part of it, like, you have to be able to go, okay, this is either going to make me better at what this thing is that I feel like I either need to do, or that I am, or that I want to do in life, or I can't take this and I'm going to go and do something else. And either one is fine, but that rejection is absolutely a part of writing. And like the criticism is a part of writing too, right? Like, you get the critical feedback. You get critical feedback on an Amazon review, or you get it from an editor, or you get it from a publisher, or you get it from a review that's not going to put your piece out, or anything. Like, there's criticism involved in this, and you have to be able to take that and do something positive with it to shake it off. Like, to go, okay, I'm going to take that bit and run with it, and not cower from it, and make myself better as a result. And if you you gotta have kind of Yeah, the ability to take criticism.
And I would say you also have to have the ability to dissect criticism. There's
Yes.
some people that you just can't please, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, I've literally in 1 week had 2 people write me saying that my writing is too sexually explicit, and then the other one saying that I need to build up the T's more. And I'm like, okay, that's a matter of preference. That's sort of an eye on the beholder thing. But if you see, I would say an overlapping feedback about something is that you definitely want to remain teachable as well.
As a teacher, have you being the person giving that kind of feedback, how does that play?
How many hopes and dreams have you crushed?
exactly.
That's
No hopes and dreams survive
He's
the
just got a little
classroom.
knapsack full of souls that he snatched.
Yeah, none of these students have ever seen a knife hand, and it breaks their heart.
When you're hungry, you just snack on the.
No, I feel a lot of self-consciousness about being like, hey, I think this could be different, because like you don't want to tell anybody, like there's a lot of horror stories where someone's like, I was in the class with this famous writer and they told me I'm terrible, I'm never going to be a writer. Now I'm winning the Pulitzer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you don't want to be that teacher.
try not to be that guy. Dude.
Well, it's like you can be terrible at the time, but like telling
Right.
somebody that they'll never be good, that's just dumb.
Yeah. And so you never want to say that, and you never want to give anyone that impression
Yeah.
that they're like going to leave and be like, I guess this isn't for me. So trying to like manage expectations there and focus on the work and be like, hey, you're good. This decision you made is suspicious. Let's say. I think, I don't know, one of the best teachers I ever had, her name was Van Bolen. She just died last year. She's an amazing poet. Read all her work. She was the harshest like workshop leader I've ever had. She would take your page-long poem and pull out like 4 lines, like, this is the poem, get rid of the rest of this. She didn't care if that resonated with you or not. She's like, that's what it is. And, there are people who would say like, that's prescriptive and you shouldn't tell people what to do like that. Let them figure it out. I loved it because I rarely agreed with any of those edits, but it did make me question them and think like, does that need to be in here? And I inevitably cut some of that stuff. But it puts you in a position to, defend your work to yourself. And if it holds up, then it holds up and you're in good shape. Same with sending stuff out for, publication. People say no. Like, I got a solicitation from a place and I knew that what I was working on at the time wasn't what they were into. But I sent them some of it and they're like, hey, no, we don't want it. And I was like, that's fine. I knew that it wasn't going to line up. So that rejection didn't feel like anything. It just felt like them saying, this isn't our taste or this isn't what we're interested in. So I don't know, you have to be able to ask yourself, like you said, dissect that criticism and ask yourself, like, what am I trying to do? Is it what they're interested in? Is this rejection aiming at the same, eventual end state?
And I think, rejection letters from querying an agent or a publisher that's a different kind of feedback than feedback that you get from your editor. A publisher or an agent might reject you for 1,000 different reasons. You might be a very good writer, but if you're not in the right genre, or they just are full up on clients, or that, there's 1,000 different reasons that might have nothing to do with you being a good writer or having a good story that might happen. Whereas like your editor, you're past that point at that point, like you've got the editor, and at that point, that editor hopefully is the right one for your story. And if they are, then it's like, oh, you really need to, you're not trying to sell them. They've already bought the book at that point. It's like, now everybody's just in this to make it as good as possible, but obviously that's a super subjective thing.
Yeah. And I want to say too, like, this is a very genre dependent discussion. Cause like when I'm sending out poems, I'm sending out batches of 5 and I'm sending different batches to different places all the time. I'm not sending out a couple of short stories to a couple of places. That rejection is a different conversation. But when you're sending out lots of work all the time, rejection pretty quickly starts to feel like nothing because everyone says no and it's fine. But I think, depending on how much you invest in that thing and where you're sending, it's really important.
Yeah.
You want to go into some of what publications are looking for right now, currently in current times?
No.
Nobody knows.
No, you don't.
No, all these drag glasses around here.
Werewolves with big titties.
I'd always tell them zombies.
Yeah.
One of the things
We should have worked some
Vampire
zombies
dicks.
in the Lucky Joe.
Oh no,
dude.
we're not talking about content.
Yeah.
He's prompting me about
Oh, yeah.
who the writer is.
I'm trying to trigger him a little bit. So one of the things, like, I know
You're being
that,
way too docile over there, Rose.
so within
Haven't
this
thrown
setting,
anything yet.
as writers, I mean, a couple of us mentioned sending stuff out to actual editors or publications in itself, but it's also mentioned within workshops and the little workshops that I've been into. Like, personally, I'm a natural hype man, so like every idea to me, I'm like, this sounds great, like, let's make this happen. That's not good feedback when it comes to a workshop, because encouraging people on just things immediately it isn't the best. So like I've realized within some of my advice within some of the workshops that I've been in is read it that second time, because when you're invested into the person, you almost are invested into what they're creating immediately, and so you just kind of want to hype it up in some sense. But it's like, no. Get into that observer mindset and say, hey, what exactly is this marketable? Is this an actual good story? What actually holds weight? If any, what questions did I actually have as a reader prior to just saying to my buddy, hey, this is good, And so I end up reading it that second time, and then I'm keeping notes as I read. So that's one thing I've at least learned within the workshops.
Observation, I think, is the best feedback you can give. Like, you can't tell someone to cut a section of the story or change something if you don't tell them what you think is happening or what you think the point is or what you're taking away from it.
Yep.
So, those edits are pretty worthless if you're not, if they don't know what you think this piece is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be able to tell them, like, hey, I really like this part of this. I like where we're going in this direction. Because if that writer looks at that feedback, it's like, oh, that's absolutely not what I was intending with this at all, then you being encouraging isn't helpful, right? Because you're telling them, keep going left, and they're like, no, this is going right, actually.
Yeah, within that criticism, it has to be critical. You have to give some kind of feedback. You have to ask those questions. You have to say, I got this, is that right? Kind of thing. And it has to be very objective. And it could be encouraging, it could be discouraging, unfortunately, too, but asking those right questions, because all it takes sometimes is maybe rewording of one sentence or adding just one sentence to kind of just keep that reader on track and be like, oh, I can figure that out one real quick, and kind of nix any kind of confusion. And so that's the little bit of advice I might want to throw out there, is if you're in some workshop, actually give that criticism.
Yeah, it's just, how do you do it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like how to workshop the workshop. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing.
And I think that I've had a tremendously difficult time actually finding a physical writers group. This is like, you can do something on Zoom or something, but like this is the type of thing that if you read books from, like the Inklings, for instance, that's probably the most famous case, is how they, Tolkien and Lewis and a couple others would go to that one bar and everything like that, and like how envious we all should be, because like you develop a relationship to where you trust each other's opinions, and also kind of like what you're saying is that you said earlier about the one setback to being a teacher is that you have to, like, I guess, to correct me if I'm wrong, is like not inject how you would write a story or a poem, is that once you get a feel for the voices and sort of the intent of your fellow writers in a small group, then I think it's easier at least to have that ability to be like, okay, I kind of get Leo's kind of direction, so and I get Marty's and such, but that's that I don't know if that's achievable in like just like a one workshop or something. I mean, that might take years.
Yeah.
And in the best pockets of literature, that has been the case. It's been years of people who have got together and they discuss their favorite books that they're reading, and they talk about what they're writing. And you look at the Beat generation, right? Like there was Ginsberg and Kerouac and Burroughs and these writers who they were all kind of doing their own thing, but they were writing, and they would get together and they would discuss what they were reading and discuss what they were writing, and it was kind of communal, and they fed off of that. And Hunter S. Thompson, had Ralph Steadman, as another person to kind of bounce things and
a trunk full of drugs.
In a trunk full of drugs everywhere he went, and that's helpful, right? That it's its own party in a box. But like that, to have that, right? To when you find that, embrace it truly. You find other people who are inclined to your own direction of madness. and who kind of get what you're trying to do. Use that network of people, you know. When you have something and you're like, you should have a couple of people, if you're writing, like you should have a couple of people who you trust enough to go, hey, what do you think of this thing? And that they understand, like, this is pre-editor time, to look at it and go, yeah, I see what you did here, and kind of like the end of the second act, or, you know, whatever it is, that like, have you thought, maybe think about it like this way? And to have that group of people, that other person, or 2 or 3, 4 people that you trust, to be able to bounce those ideas around with pre-editor is incredibly valuable. And when you can, you know, have those relationships continue to multiply and amplify, you know, in a sense, you know, then everyone's work kind of gets better as a result of that communal relationship, and everyone sharing their work with one another, and giving feedback before it's time to really get Frankenstein and kick down the hallway.
Yeah.
And that's actually real quick. Something we're going way back here. The original prompt is this fear of imitation. Is Tom Spanbauer had said that his workshops, you know, all his students started imitating each other, but it became like a competitive imitation. So there's a positive side to that as well. You know, I mean, maybe not for a published project, but while you're sharpening your teeth. Yeah.
Each one of y'all's journeys in some aspect, you know, you guys have put it out to the world, and so was that the intention, something that just happened naturally?
I didn't even intend to be a fucking writer.
Exactly.